Welcome to today's DocuNav Solutions webinar. Swipe right for smarter integrations, connecting Laserfish to your technology ecosystem by leveraging APIs. I'm Parker Hutchison, Customer Success Manager here at DocuNav Solutions, and I will be your moderator for today. We're excited to have Abraham Rincon, Solutions Engineer 2, joining us to walk through how organizations can leverage Laserfish APIs to create smarter, more connected workflows across their technology systems. Today, most organizations rely on a variety of systems to keep their operations running, from ERP and HR platforms to finance, CRM, permitting, and other business applications. But when those systems don't communicate with one another, it can lead to siloed information, manual processes, duplicate data entry, and unnecessary bottlenecks. So today's session is about changing that. Abraham will show us how Laserfish can serve as a central hub for connecting systems, data, people, and processes, helping organizations move beyond disconnected workflows and create more seamless, automated operations. So, to make today's sessions as interactive as possible, we will be injecting a few pause points for questions throughout the webinar, and we'd love for everyone to participate by dropping answers in the chat. If you do have additional questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them into the chat at any time. I will be monitoring those questions throughout the session, and we'll have Abraham address those as many as possible during our Q&A as well. So just as a notice, before we get started, a quick reminder that today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing after the session on our YouTube channel. So I appreciate everyone for joining today. Thank you again. Abraham, we're excited to hear how organizations can put Laserfish APIs to work and create better connections across their technology ecosystem, and I'll turn it over to you.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much, Parker. And that's a great introduction right there. And I want to see that everyone is in here. Is perfect. All right, so I'll get started. Like he said earlier, we're just gonna be covering today how to create custom integrations in Laserfish, and some considerations that you're gonna have to take into place when you're making these integrations. And lastly, it's just you don't want any data silos anywhere, right? So if you are working with a system that you know is automated, it's in a SQL database, you should, and you probably, yeah, you should be able to just integrate that into your system right away. And thankfully, Laserfish gives you the tools. Some of them are not necessarily obvious to every single user, but the idea behind today's webinar is that you get that context from the get-go, right? So right here, as Parker already said, my name is Abraham Rincon, and my Solutions Engineer 2 over here at DocuNav. Um, I'm pretty sure that if you guys have worked with us in the past, you guys have probably talked to me as well. I know I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces here, so I'm not gonna say names, but welcome all of you to this meeting. Like I said, we're super excited to talk to you about this specific topic because this is where we see Laserfish shine, right? Laserfish has a lot of features built into it, and these integrations allows you to extend that feature set beyond something that Laserfish doesn't have, right? You can think of API calls, you can think of specific features that are available to your applications that Laserfish might not have natively. This allows you to engage with those and have a more interconnected system. Um, as for the agenda for today, like Parker said, starting with the APIs, and I want to take a step back because we keep repeating this word API, and those are great and always great to have and always great to make, but they require super specific skill set to be around, and maintenance and code and all these specific components and a third-party application. Let's step back a little bit, but because workflow on its own and the Laserfish ecosystem as it is, has a lot of really useful utilities you can use to bypass a lot of these custom integrations in third-party systems and do it all within Laserfish itself. So the first number there, the options to interact with native Laserfish features is what do you have at your disposal at this very same moment to say, I can automate this specific process. I can get this file moved from place A to place B. I can start a form process. I can send a reminder to somebody. I can send an email. All of those integrations are really great because they allow you to create processes without any code whatsoever. So I want to stress that although we have this wide range of features that I'm going to cover today, and there are definitely more, and some of them can even be their own webinar on their own. Um, I really want to start with the basics because most of those integrations you're going to build anyways are going to have to interact with these basics at one point or another. So I want to stress out that we're going to cover native features and put emphasis on them because they're great for a lot of reasons that I'm going to cover later. We're going to cover still native features in Laserfish, but those that allow you to communicate with external systems. You can think of them as features that allow for that communication outside of SQL, right? Because a lot of the features in that we use and leverage every single day are tied to SQL in one way or another. Uh, this basically bypasses that, and you can call from external systems. This is great for a myriad of reasons that I'm going to cover later. But again, working with those specific components is always great to having an integration that is better and yeah, better overall, right? And then lastly, can't forget about it, the API and the SDK. If you've worked with an API and or an SDK in the past, you know what you're getting into. This is 100% just a set of utilities, of functions, or methods that you can use to truly interact with Laserfish without having to go through Laserfish. These are usually great if you have external applications that require reading and or writing data into Laserfish or out of Laserfish as well. It's really important. It's bidirectional in this case. And you can use that specific feature set to go about that. This is great, like I said, custom applications. I've seen a lot of useful examples I'm going to cover later. But if you truly want your application to be built with Laserfish, around Laserfish and all those features, you can use this specific SDK to get that accomplished. Now, I want to say that the target audience for today's webinar is that of CIOs, IT leaders, system administrator, operators, and or people who have a say as to what integrations and or automations are made in a system. Um, though I want to preface that that's not really something that should be keeping you away from this webinar. I really want you to use this as a tool for you to use in the future, because in reality, and it's something that happens to me all the time, a lot of integrations, a lot of automations die because, well, was there, what can we do? How can we do that, right? We want to do a specific component. We want to do something, move a file from point A to point B. How do we get that accomplished? I know we can do that easily in Laserfish. You just have somebody drag it over. Um, but how do we do that with a computer? How do we do that without any human intervention? How do we authenticate to Laserfish properly? How do we have all the security? All of these are pretty important questions that you're going to have. And my target with today's webinar is that you come out today with knowing what tools are available to you, your disposal today, so you can get those integrations going. Again, automating everything, making everything simpler, removing work from people that, let's say, data entry, which is always time consuming and can lead to errors in the process. Imagine a last name doesn't have one letter or it's not capitalized or any of those process or any of those errors, right? That can all be mitigated entirely through the use of these just APIs. And lastly, we're targeting the self-hosted platform of Laserfish, though I want to also put an asterisk on that a lot of these integrations you're about to see work perfectly fine within Laserfish cloud. So if you are in a cloud environment, do not leave this video. You still get a lot of value out of it, because ultimately a lot of the stuff like the APIs, the SDKs, the form objects, workflows, all of that stuff is still available to you. So yeah, feel free to leverage that as you may. Again, all the screenshots, all the stuff you're gonna see is specifically for self-hosted though. Just keep it handy. All right, so I want to start by categorizing what we're going to cover, because ultimately, like I mentioned earlier, this is all about integrations, API, system, external system connections. Um, and I want to begin by categorizing them, like I mentioned, by several factors. One of them is how long it takes to set up the integration. An integration that takes 5 minutes to complete that, and it doesn't take 20 hours, for example, is better. Um, and that doesn't require, it might actually require less maintenance. So again, time for setting it up, the maintenance required to keep it running over time, how hard is it to upgrade it, and also really important is the directionality of it, right? So where am I going? Is it going into Laserfish, out of Laserfish, only within Laserfish itself? So I'll begin talking about these categories here. I want to preface that these are not titles you're going to find anywhere. This is just something I came up with for this specific presentation, because I want to lay it out in a way that you can understand in terms of complexity, right? Again, it's how time consuming they are, how cost effective they are, how useful they are, how can you maintain them over time. And I wanted to address them from left to right. So anything that is a native integration, as you can see right here, is everything that comes built into Laserfish, no need to do anything externally. These are features that you can leverage right now in your system, as long as you have access to that application, for example, forms, right? So these are always going to be the best integrations you can use, not because they are the ones that we want you to use, not because they are Laserfish and Laserfish is great and all of that stuff, which it is, but because these are the ones that take the least amount of maintenance. You don't have to do anything crazy. You don't have to set up any connections that are complicated to set up. If you have a working Laserfish environment, you have a working SQL environment. And if that's the case, you can leverage these integrations without the need of setting any other external source um, right away. So you might have, think about that. You might have your SIS data in a SQL table. You can pull that out, right? And again, you do have a working SQL server, so there's no setup required for you. Now, if we go to the middle section, um, this is where we're still in Laserfish territory, right? Which everything is native to Laserfish, everything is provided by Laserfish, it's super simple to use. But what changes is the directionality of it, right? What can we do with that? And I like to think that the intermediate integrations, which I'm going to show, are going from inside of Laserfish to an external source. Think of it as retrieving data from external sources, right? And for those, we have workflow custom scripts, which you might have used before, HTTP request, fairly obvious. And we also have the LForms object, which I've gotten really familiar with over the past few months. So I'm always here, like I said, if you do have any questions of any of these, feel free to put them in the chat. And the last section we're going to cover is that of the full integrations. I like to consider them full because they're just the full-fledged SDK, the full-fledged REST API available to all Laserfish platforms. So those are great if you've ever used any of those APIs. You know how they allow you to do a lot of stuff. And the Laserfish APIs are no exception. You can do basically everything in the system as long as you have the way and or the vision as to what you need to create. So it's fantastic for getting those automations going. And I will reiterate, if you're making your own application that is external, that is user-facing, that has nothing to do with Laserfish, you really want to use the full integration because you don't have to log in. You don't have to, again, authenticate. You don't have to show the menu. You don't have to right-click to it. No, you can just run a function that gives you a button to start a workflow, for example. It's great for those purposes, but the caveat here is that as you go to the right here, it becomes significantly more expensive, right? It's more expensive, it's more time consuming. You need to now start learning how to get those created. So again, you really want to start with what's in workflow and then move over slowly as you go, because some of these integrations are not going to require anything crazy, fancy, out of the box solutions at all. Some of these are going to be built into workflow, and if they're not, they probably will in the future. So keep that in mind. I'll begin with the native integrations, but at this point, let's take a breath. Does anybody have any questions on what we've covered so far? Right. If you don't have any questions, that's fine. If you do though, just put them in the chat. We'll have a few of these breaks in the middle. Just place them there, and I'll then answer them on their due time. So yeah.
As well, I'll be monitoring that chat. So if you do have questions, I'll make sure Abraham's aware that there are questions coming in.
Awesome. Thank you, Parker. All right, so let's begin with the first integration that I love the most because it is the simplest one of them. It has the quickest turnarounds, and it's something that everybody here should be familiar with in one way or another. And if you're not, I invite you to go in and start working with this because this is great. It's just workflow. Workflow on its own is an integration platform you can use to automate processes on your end. And although it might not be entirely obvious as to why, I want you to think about how that integrates with Laserfish internally. And this is just an integration within the Laserfish ecosystem. Um, and that's why I call that a native integration, right? Laserfish Workflow can do basically everything you want it to do in the environment itself. If we're thinking about data as in documents or folders, you can move folders, create folders, delete folders, assign tags, create links. Workflow has this really great thing is that it has all these flow control activities in the middle. So it's conditional statement, parallels, delays, um, if escalations, all of these specific components make it essentially a no-code programming language. So if you've ever coded in any other programming language, you know that those are great because they give you a lot of granularity. But workflow is that without the actual code. So you just drag in the activity, you get it done, and you can get a document moved somewhere else, renamed, have retention applied to it. And the secret factor here, the secret feature that we have in here, which is also secret, is in the feature set, is that you can do HTTP requests, which is what we mentioned earlier. You can create custom SDK scripts. You can work with external documents like Word. You can export documents in and out. It's pretty great if you want to automate processes because it gives you all the tools out of the box. No need to configure anything. Did you want to send an email? That's fine. You don't have to set up an SMTP server. Somebody probably already set that up for you. All you have to do is just say, I want to email somebody. So these integrations are great because they're probably already built for you. And you can just leverage them immediately. As soon as this meeting is done, you can go to Workflow and start working with them, right? So, and I keep saying that this is an integration in the Laserfish ecosystem because you're not calling a workflow that then does something crazy somewhere else. That's where the intermediate ones are going to come into place. But just keep in mind that any integration you use, I recommend you use and leverage these specific components because they're great for extending the utility that Laserfish has. Um, Again, automation is through the roof with this specific component. So yeah, leverage them. Um, and I also wanted to cover on that one actually. I didn't mention it, but this list of items um, is much bigger now than it used to be. If you work with Laserfish 10, right, Workflow 10, Workflow 9, you might have noticed that some of these are very new. In Laserfish 12, they added features to control user accounts, and in LFDS using Workflow. So you don't even have to go through any scheme process for if you want to create accounts, for example. So we've seen a lot of customers go that route because the system they're trying to integrate with for identity providers doesn't support a native scheme with Laserfish, or doesn't have the right method, or is not compatible, or has a specific nuance. As long as you can get some piece of information, you can easily get that all covered now. So I want to continue saying that if you don't see the activity that you want to do or you want to use in the current day and age, it might be added tomorrow, right? And that goes with a lot of integrations that have been made. We've seen a lot of customers that make super cool integrations that are extremely complex, extremely detailed, but then Laserfish 12 comes around, that integration is built into the system. Usually that will probably be sad for the person who made it, but in reality it's good for all of you because now it's easier to maintain. It's a native feature within Laserfish that is supported, right? So keep an eye on these ones because again, it keeps growing, it keeps getting better, and it just helps you automate your Laserfish ecosystem super well. All right. So imagine, and now let's step out of the box a little bit, and let's think that Laserfish is not giving you that one utility you need, and you need to pull something out of SQL. You can, right? Like I mentioned earlier, if you have a working Laserfish environment, you have a working SQL server. So what you can do is you can create your own tables and or keep them up to date and or have a third-party integration somewhere else that dumps that data into SQL, and you can use this query data activity or the custom queries as well to get data out in any format you want. This is not limited to just views or tables. You can also do a store procedure. So you can call a store procedure that gives you a specific result. As you can see right there, I have a table with a very fictional data. That's not my date of birth. And I'm calling it from SQL, and notice how it's just coming into workflow. Now you might ask, why is this an important thing to point out? And this is that if you have your information in workflow, now you open the gate to all of those really nifty activities there, like setting metadata, like setting retention. So if you get clever with it, you can automate a lot of processes in workflow just by using SQL alone. You don't have to step out of any platform as long as you can get that data into SQL, right? And I like to think that SQL is a pretty simple program to use overall. So if I am going to create a custom application, a custom integration, a custom code, I'd rather do it in SQL than in any other language because it's the one that requires the least amount of effort to complete, and it's super simple to read, and it's just a really good starting point. So if you're in the need of integrating with a third-party program, and that program gives you the ability to have a SQL table somewhere near in your Laserfish server, this is a great way to start. The same applies for Laserfish forms. We've been discussing workflow all this time. Let's take a break and let's do forms. Forms has the same functionality. I'm pretty sure everybody on this meeting is aware of lookup rules, which is great. But you might not think of it as an integration, but we're calling data externally from an external source, right? We're calling data from the SQL server in this case, but it could be a link server. It could be some other server somewhere else. It could be a view that points to another server. It could be the amount of features you have at your disposal here are immense, and you can automate a lot of processes and get a lot of that um, data input kind of out of the way. In this case, I'm inputting some injury report ID, and all of that information about the report itself, because it's on SQL, gets presented to me, right? Eliminates having to type all that information. Eliminates having to use a. Imagine you're using the name and last name to store the document into Laserfish. Well, now somebody put a wrong character. What if somebody put a dash? Well, the dash is gonna be on the name of the document. No more. You can pull that from SQL. So again, it might not be a feature that you might consider an integration, but it very much is, and I would advise that you use it. Again, everybody here should be familiar with it if you work with anything DocuNav related. All right. Another one, which you might also be familiar with, is that of the use of dynamic fields, right? Just like we did with workflow, we have a table that goes into workflow. Like we did with forms, we have a table that goes to forms. We can also do that with the repository, right? We can say fields. I can create a table like I do here with column 1, 2, and 3, and I can say I want to show these specific choices for this field, but only depending on what choice is selected. So I can say I want the choice field itself on that dropdown, to be populated by the column 1, which is what I did at the bottom there. And then the choices that present after that are those that are in that table as well. So if you have used any of our packages, you know that this is a great feature because we can categorize documents by 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 the document types, right? Instead of showing a list of 200 distinct document types, we ask you a question first. What is a document type? Oh, it's an enrollment document. Cool. What type of enrollment document is it? And so on and so forth. So it's a good way to, again, integrate it with an external source, and you can think of how you can use this and leverage it in let's say, an employee table. Imagine you have a field they call employee, right? Just like I do there. And instead of just putting a name, it could be the whole name, last name, and employee ID, right? How do you get that into the system dynamically? Without it being a static process where you have to update it manually? This is your answer, right? You can just do the drop down. When you press on the drop down, it shows you all the employees that match that criteria. So it's a great use for that. Again, don't sleep on this one. Really great. Makes everything super automated for you in the repository. And again, another integration for you. All right. So those are the native ones within Laserfish itself. Any questions so far? I don't see any other in the chat. Again, I'll repeat. If you have any questions, drop them in there. I'll proceed since I don't want to have any dead timing here. I know everybody has their time and it's really busy and important, so I'll continue. But yeah, feel free to drop your questions in there. Right, so this is where we get to the intermediate uh, integrations, and I like to think of this as directional in the sense that you can get data into Laserfish out of any other program, right? You can say I want to run a workflow that picks up a data from somewhere else that is not SQL, and then we do something with it. Right, so the first one to start is the workflow HTTP request activity. And like I mentioned earlier, this is technically a native integration because it's a workflow activity, but the amount of depth that you get with this specific component is massive, right? So you can just call on an API. In this case, I just set up a local API on my server to demo, but you can call an API endpoint. When the workflow runs, it authenticates against that API, gets its access token, and then queries the data for you. And as you can see on that right panel there, I was able to get the timestamp out of what was essentially an API. Again, not SQL, this is from an external system. So as long as what you're trying to query can be reached by that workflow server, and the authentication methods that are at Laserfish's disposal is available to you, you can leverage this as fine. We've seen historically, though, and I want to put a caveat on this, that it just depends on the current feature set of Laserfish. They have been adding more and more features. For example, in Laserfish 12, they added OAuth2, which if you know anything about APIs, you know that's the name of the game. So they have added OAuth2 and they've added client credentials as well, and they have other flow authorization flows available as well. Some of them might not be directly available to you though, and that's the caveat that I want to put. If your API doesn't use a conventional method of authentication, you might have to get a little bit more out of the box for that component. But the reality here is that most APIs are going to be OAuth2 client credential, and if that's the case, you can leverage it in Laserfish. And one thing that I want to point out is that if you're doing any queries to an API externally, I would recommend using the read JSON object or component, because what you can do is you can call an API, it will give you a JSON object. You have a native Laserfish field. You can put in a field. You can use to move a document, or do conditionals, right? So it's great for that purpose. So just keep this one in mind, because we're going to the custom SDK, and I mentioned earlier that you might have to get a little bit more out of the box. This is where the actual API SDK starts. Workflow has this SDK script utility, which is essentially just a .NET framework 4.8 C# environment code for you to code. That's all there is to it. There's nothing else to say. It's just a system where you can make all the code you want to make. We've seen it being useful for a lot of purposes. Laserfish doesn't currently support working with Excel files, for example, and I know a lot of people want to open an Excel file, edit a specific cell, or multiple cells, and then save the document. This is something you can do with using custom code, using this. I had an integration in the past where an API was sending documents, PDF documents, encoded in base64, right? And Laserfish doesn't know what to do with base64 encoded data. I send it to an API, an SDK, get it decoded, and then attach it to the image, attach it to the document from there. So it's a great way of kind of closing the loop, because as I mentioned earlier, HTTP requests are great, but they often don't take you all the way there. Maybe you have to put another step in, just like I had to do for another integration that I built, where the API itself was easy to use. So just pass in your access token and you get all the data you want. That's perfect. But actually authenticating to that API was the hard part, because it was using a JWT token, which Workflow will not make for you. There's no JWT token native feature in Workflow. So what I did is I made an API, I made
Good
an
morning,
SDK.
David. What's up? Good. Hey,
Somebody unmuted? Okay, that's fine. So I've had to make like I said, an SDK to actually get the access token from that specific program, so that I can send it to the application itself. Again, integrations take effort, and as you're seeing as we go further into this presentation, the effort is becoming exponential, right? You're not dragging and dropping a field or a component from workflow. You're not coding. You're not making code that has to integrate with third-party sources. So keep that in mind that as we go, it gets more powerful, but it also gets more time consuming. Another thing with the SDKs is that, again, I want to reiterate, this is just a C# environment for you to use. So what you can do is you can leverage the existing namespaces that come available with workflow. So by default, you get the system object and you get the laserfish.repository. But if you don't want to use those, you can import your own. So for that one application that I had to build, I ended up using Bouncy Castle and Newtonsoft JSON, right? To be able to create a specific JSON objects and then to be able to encrypt the JWT tokens I was trying to, what was creating to get the access token, right? So if you are in the need of a more out-of-the-box solution, this will get you there. And I want to emphasize, I glanced over it, but I want to emphasize that the Laserfish repository access object in the workflow is just essentially a way to control Laserfish files and or folders, metadata, security. We code it programmatically instead of it being an activity in the workflow. Now, you might wonder why that's useful because you have a workflow, you're working in workflow itself, but there has been a lot of situations where being able to, let's say, like I mentioned earlier, getting a PDF document from a third party and then decoding the base64 information and then dumping it into a document, that is a great use that you can't do natively, but you can use in the script. And then lastly, I also want to point out that because this is workflow, this is Laserfish, everything is fully integrated, you can get data out and into the SDK script from workflow. So if you, let's say you make an SDK script that you're passing any number and it gives you the square root of that number, even though you shouldn't have to because there's a native utility for that, you can store the result into a field like I'm doing there. So set token value, in this case is TK token, and I'm storing the result of that, right? Again, just useful utilities for you to have. And these workflow SDK scripts can go really, really far. And if you've used anything C sharp, you know that maybe you don't like C sharp, maybe you want to do something else. I've seen it being done where you run a C sharp script that just runs another script somewhere else in the system, right? A Python file, for example. Because at the end of the day, you have a fully fledged C sharp environment for you to work with. So I don't want you to sleep on this one. This one is absolutely massive as to what you can do, but it does have a steeper learning curve. Again, we're increasing complexity as we go. Um, let's return back to forms because forms also has a lot of things going on for them. It's not just the lookup rules. One thing that is extremely useful, and, I've, and I know a lot of people here in this meeting will say, I know about that, is the Laserfish LForms object. I'm going to give you a little more context though, because this is not something that might apply to you directly right now. And if it doesn't, that's fine. Eventually it will. So Laserfish in Laserfish 10, uh, the only forms you could have made was classic forms, right? Those forms where you can't put fields side by side. Those classic forms have basically untethered. They have the most powerful JavaScript engine you can have. You can do anything in that JavaScript code if you want to, which is what we've seen a lot of people do. They have really complex integrations in Laserfish forms because of that custom code. That's not the case anymore with SFH 11 and 12, mostly because if you work with modern forms, which is what everybody should be working with today, they're easier to work with, they're more reliable, and they are easier definitely to submit. You can put fields side by side, you have more rules. If you're working with modern forms, you get a fully sandboxed environment instead, which means that you don't get access to a lot of the things that you had access before. You can't just delete all the JavaScript or all the HTML on the page if you want to. You can no longer do that because everything is sandboxed. Now, normally that would have been a letdown for sure because having less features is not always great. But I argue that we have about the same number of features, if not just an identical range, because of this LForms object. And there is a link at the bottom of the page. You feel free to use it. Just go to Google and type in LForm object. Uh, this is available also in cloud if you want it as well. And what it is just a set of, it's just an object you can get in the JavaScript to interact with the fields itself on the actual form. So you can do very crazy stuff with it. And again, it's sandbox, but you still can access it. So a few of the examples that LSFP gives you, and this is what, and I'm showcasing this straight out of the source, because I don't want you to feel like this is just a utility for hiding or showing fields or making forms more complex. That's not what it is. you have a fully fledged JavaScript environment to leverage here. So um, an example that Lazyfish gives you is making an API call straight from forms at runtime when the form loads. For example, you can do that. I was discussing earlier with my coworker, but what if you want to show the weather in the form for some reason? I'm not here to judge your integrations. I'm here to tell you that the option is available for you, right? So if you want to show the weather, you can call an API to show the weather. What if you want to translate all the contents of the form, including user submission? Well, you can use the Google API for that using this specific method. So I want you to understand that even though this might not be at first glance designed to be used for that purpose, it is very much done. It is very much for, and this is coming from a straight out of Laserfish. They have a lot of documentation on this object. I recommend that you give it a read. It is extremely useful when you're working with forms. Um, and I'm sure that I've leveraged it a lot in the last few months. So keep in mind that this is this is an option for you. And if you don't want to do API calls because you don't think that's a cool thing to do in a form, you can interact with the form itself at a deeper level. For example, you can change the contents of a field, not just the contents, but you can change the value of the field, the label on the field. If it's an HTML element, you can build your own HTML pages. You can make an iframe. You can put an iframe inside of the form and use this code to get data in and out of that iframe. Um, so you can get pretty complex with this API. And it is a really good read. So like I said, I recommend you going to that link. It's fantastic if you want to work with forms, especially if you were used to working with forms code in the past. Maybe you updated recently to Laserfish 12. Then now you have to use all these modern forms. Well, how do I bridge the gap? How do I make this button turn a different color if something happens? This is where a lot of it gets done. So I would definitely not sleep on this either. This is an example of what I built using this specific forms object. Notice how Lazyfish by itself doesn't give you a drawing element to use, right? You don't have anything that you can use for drawing other than the signature field, right? So what I did is just, let's put a canvas in there and let's get it done. So in the Lazyfish form, there is a drawing element where you can just draw over it, right? Sometimes fields are not enough to explain everything you want to explain in a form. You can easily just build something custom for you. So again, it sounds like a limit, but the LFM objects is really great at this, and this is all built in the modern form designer. Maybe you think, oh, this is no big deal in the classic designer, but in the modern designer, this is a pretty big deal because we're leveraging that LFM object to the fullest extent. So yeah, this is something you can do. I just want to show this example. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it before, but just wanted to show it out there. All right. Any questions on that? I don't see any, so yeah, I'll go ahead and proceed with that. Now we get into the actual stuff. If you are looking to integrate with a platform and/or application you've created, this is where it gets to the point where you can build stuff properly for Laserfish. And like I mentioned earlier, I want to consider the directionality of how everything is going. If you remember the beginning steps, the native integrations, they're all in this Laserfish bubble, so nothing comes out of Laserfish. From the intermediate integrations, now we're going out of Laserfish. We're going from Laserfish to pick up some information somewhere else, right? But that is mostly read-only, right? That's you're only reading information from an external source. What if you want to just work externally without any restrictions? This is where the full integration is coming to place because Laserfish gives you the tools to make that happen. So there is a website at the bottom. You can also access it by just searching for Laserfish API. The site is actually called developer.laserfish.com. So it gives you a table as soon as you log in, not log in, but as soon as you open the page, it gives you this table, which you can see all the API features they offer. Um, I will only be covering some of them because these are pretty massive APIs, but just keep in mind that um, I want you to see that the Laserfish Cloud check is all marked in there. There are technically more APIs in cloud than there are in the repository, and it's just because of the nature of the application itself. But some of these do also work in the self-hosted versions, like it is the repository API, for example. Right, the B2 and the B1 APIs are really useful for getting information out of Laserfish if you're in that need. Um, there's also the Laserfish SDK, which is what we mentioned earlier with Workflow. That is the Laserfish repository object you can use to then control anything within Workflow. Keep in mind that as we get into these Laserfish APIs and so on, you might need to have a special licensing for it. Now, I would recommend you get with your CSM before you jump into this. I know you're all really excited for that, but just make sure you have the license for it. and you can contact your system for that. That's the only thing, the only caveat. For example, the Laserfish SDK requires an SDK license, for example. Again, you can look at all that information in that website. There's no logins. Go in and start looking around at what they have. They also have pretty useful examples if you want to use any of these APIs. And it's very well documented if you want to get started with it. What I will highlight here is that repository API, because if you use any REST API before, you know the word Swagger, and the reason for that is because it's really great at showing you what endpoints are available to you. Not too long ago, I just set up the API on my server, took an install, pretty simple. You got it installed, got it configured. They tell you how to do so in that documentation right there. And then the last thing I had to do was just call it. So I made an API call using Bruno, and I got objects in there. As you can see, I'm doing actually a search. I'm doing a simple search, and I'm searching for anything that has the word job on it. And notice how I picked up a document that's called job description. Again, this might not be immediately useful to you. You might say, why would I want this for? But if you're making a custom application that requires reading from Laserfish, this is pretty neat. This is a pretty good use of that functionality. And I can give you a practical example because we have a customer that has an extension that when you log into your SIS, it knows which ID or which student you're standing on, and and you open the extension and it gives you all the documents in the repository. You click on it and it takes you to the repository. Pretty clean, pretty good. And it saves away having to click away and finding the repository and finding that student. If you can get to the student in that SIS, you can get to the document in Laserfish. Pretty simple. So I truly recommend that if you haven't done so, get started with using this API. Um, Thankfully, the actual barrier of entry is not really that high because you have that Swagger you can use and it tells you how to use it. It's well documented, and that developer side is really is going to be your best friend there. Though you always feel free to ask questions, we're always here to help. But yeah, it's a really cool API you can leverage, and should you have the license for it as well. And I want to continue to reiterate that just because it's external and because it's meant to be used by third-party applications doesn't mean that it's not powerful. This is extremely powerful. If I go here and read all these features, you spend the whole day, but the TLDR is that you can get how many documents you have. You can import documents, you can create folders, you can delete pages. It goes even to the page level, right? So you can delete pages from documents. You can get all the fields from the document. You can see how many documents are in a folder. You can add tags, you can remove tags. So, and this is just the entries component in that Swagger page, just the entries. We also have searches. If you want to do a search, you can have a save search and do so and do the search right there. You have field definitions. Now, if you've ever worked with an API before and you are, let's say, importing a document into a system, right? You just don't want to import a document because importing a document is half the picture. You also need to know the metadata that needs to be associated with that document, right? Well, that's a really good endpoint right there because you tell it what field you're trying to use, and it tells you everything about that field, right? There's also one for template. You can do template definition. You tell it the template you want to use. Let's say I want to use the template for student records, and it tells you all the fields you have to provide. You provide them using your API, you're using an external program. The document is in there, fully indexed for you, automatically out of the box. So this requires zero interaction with any Laserfish UI, just setting up the API and that's it, right? There's also the tags one, the tag definition. You can see what tags are in the system. You can assign a tag. Uh, Given that tags can be used for multiple purposes, not just tagging documents that also securing them, this is really useful feature if you want to remotely modify permissions for documents as well, right? So again, don't sleep on this one. It's a fantastic feature to use, and it's most likely what you will end up using. Um, but there is one more that I want to discuss here, and this is by far the most complex one out of all of them. And like I said, this one is probably could be its own webinar alone, of multiple hour webinar at that, because this is where all the actual integrations with external programs comes into place. We discussed that Laserfish Workflow has the SDK in the workflow activity you can use, but what if you don't want to use that environment? What if you want to do it in the other direction? What if you want to, let's say, make a program, a C# program that when used, you can manipulate things and now run workflows in the repository, right? Because as we mentioned earlier, this repository API is only for the purposes of the repository, right? Working with documents in the repository, but nothing to do with workflow. This is where this comes into place. And as a cool fact, web service is what Laserfish uses to trigger workflows from forms and from the repository. So this is the native feature that Laserfish uses for that purpose. Um, like I said, this is something that we could have hours of training for on our webinar. I left the link in the description in the at the bottom of that slide. I want you to take a look at it. But in reality, this can go very deep as to what you can do. They are showing up an example of putting a text box, and then you put the name of the workflow and you press start, and it starts that workflow. Although that might be useful, I want you to imagine combining these APIs using the REST API to get all the documents in the system, listing them in a list, for example, and then doing some math to see which documents should be listed. Maybe items pending, maybe documents that are missing some form of metadata. You click on it, it opens a menu. You now have a bunch of options to assign the metadata. You press assign, it runs a workflow, assigns the metadata, refiles it, sends an email to some person. You can get really creative here. And one thing that isn't available is any more functionality for forms. There's not a forms API per se, it's just data from objects. But anything you want to do with forms is either started by forms or by workflow. And if you know anything, we are speaking about an automation process for workflow. So you can make a workflow that starts a form, and now you have work forms fully automated as well. Imagine you want to have an application that deals with employees, and then maybe somebody got onboarded. You press on a start onboarding process, it sends them a whole packet of forms for them to complete for their onboarding package, and everything is tracked to doing using this application. Again, the sky's the limit. I'm not coming here to tell you what your integration should be. I'm just here to tell you that you can build the integration if you're willing to go through these steps. The only caveat of this process, like I mentioned earlier, is complex. You need to now know how to make an application in C#, not just knowing how to work with the web service itself, with the API, because I don't know if you can see that they're super blurry, but it says iWorkflow API base. So it's just a workflow API. So it's not just about learning how to work with that API. It's also knowing how to work with C# and making a program in C# and doing all this stuff. And yes, so just keep it in mind, available to you. You can leverage it, but again, more complexity to it. But yeah, any questions? And this is the last slide for questions. I swear, we're at the end of it. So if you don't have any questions, that's fine. But yeah. All right, so I don't see any questions in the chat. I do have one more slide for you guys. So since we're at the end of the process, I know we spoke about a lot of things. Hopefully, I opened your mind to a few integrations that maybe you thought about them in the past, and you say I can't build that right now because there's no feature for that. There is, and if you have that sort of integration, get in contact with us. We can help you build it. There's also the support contact if you have any issues. Oh, we have a question from William.
Did I hear you say correctly that I can't initiate a workflow from the API? I would have to use the SDK.
I would say so. Yeah, you have to use this SDK specifically. Right
Okay.
there. So you use that SDK. Now you can trigger workflows using the API using different methods. For example, you can set up a workflow that runs when you modify a document, and then you modify the document using the API. So if you have a process, imagine you are dropping documents into a folder for collection. You can drop those documents into that folder, and that folder will then file the documents for you. Right.
Sure.
This is more if you want to make something super ad hoc, and this SDK allows you to schedule workflows to run, or you can run them immediately. So it's great for that purpose, just that, again, more complex.
Okay. And then we're on-prem, and I think we have version 1 of the API. We were kind of always being told version 2 is coming out. Is version 2 out for on-prem yet?
All the screenshots you've seen is from version 2. So if I can access it, so you probably can too as well. So yeah, it's been out. So this is I'm not showing it in the Swagger page because I took a screenshot and didn't include that, but there is a dropdown for B2 and B1 using the Laserfish 12 API. So if it might just require updating if you don't have that latest version. But I don't know if you can see on that link. When I took a screenshot, I really took it really small. I'm sorry for that. It says B2 right after the repository. So
yeah, I'm on my Swagger for our local, but we only have B1.
B1, okay, might require an update of the Laserfish API specifically.
Okay, okay, I'll check into that.
Absolutely. All right, so great, fantastic questions. Any other question?
Abraham is a valuable resource, folks, and has lots of information and loves to share. So if you do have additional questions, you're more than welcome to utilize the resources provided here on the screen to get those engaged. Abraham is more than welcome to follow up with those with you individually, as well as a team effort from our support staff who is top-notch in taking care of customer solutions and needs. So Feel free to reach out at any time. A recording of this meeting will be posted to YouTube for review afterwards. Feel free to download and share with other relevant members of the team within your organizations. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll see you on the next one.